The silence, after her words, was deafening. There I was, on the terrace of my own home, surrounded by the family I had built and loved for decades, and I felt as if I had just signed my social death sentence. The words still echoed in the air, perfumed by the roses in the garden. I want my fortune to be used to create the Abundant Life Fund, $200 million. My entire life, built brick by brick, formula by formula, dream by dream. And then Alvaro, my son-in-law, raised his eyes with that coldness I knew so well, but which had never been directed at me with such cruelty. If you do this, you'll die rich and hated. The words sliced from his mouth like sharpened blades, cutting not only the air, but something much deeper within me. I saw Marina, my eldest daughter, instantly pale. Edward, my middle child, choked on his tea. The grandchildren, John and Lucy, looked at me with those youthful eyes full of confusion, and I felt something break in my chest. It wasn't just the shock of gratuitous cruelty, it was the confirmation of a fear that had haunted me for years. Would it be possible that after all I had built, all I had given, all I had sacrificed, I would truly be remembered only as the rich old woman? Today, at 68, looking back, I can clearly see the exact moment my life truly began to change. It wasn't when I launched my first natural cosmetic product, nor when the company reached its first million in revenue. It was on that summer afternoon, on the terrace I had designed myself, when I decided that my fortune would have a purpose far greater than simply perpetuating privilege. But to understand how I got there, I need to go back to the beginning. My name is Cecilia Moreau, and this is the story of how I discovered that true wealth lies not in what we accumulate, but in what we choose to leave behind. I was born into a humble family in rural São Paulo. My mother, Rose, worked as a seamstress, and my father was a bricklayer. Our house had 3 rooms and a backyard where my mother grew medicinal herbs. She was the one who made home remedies for the entire neighborhood, teas, ointments, syrups made with plants she had known since childhood. I used to sit beside her as she mixed ingredients, fascinated by the transformation that happened in her calloused hands. "Cecilia," she would say, "nature gives us everything we need. The secret is to know how to listen to what it has to teach us." These were the words I carried with me when, at 18, I came to the capital with only a suitcase and $50 in my pocket. I got a job as a clerk in a compounding pharmacy, where I spent my days observing how pharmacists created personalized formulas. At night, I studied chemistry using books borrowed from the public library. My first product was born by accident. An elderly customer constantly complained of dry skin, and none of the commercial creams worked. I remembered my mother's recipes, and one night, I mixed coconut oil, aloe vera, and a few drops of lavender essential oil. When I brought the makeshift jar for the lady to try, I didn't imagine I was creating the first product of what would become one of the largest natural cosmetics companies in the country. Success didn't come immediately. I spent years working 16 hours a day, developing formulas in the kitchen of my 20-square-meter apartment, selling door to door, facing the distrust of those who didn't believe that a young, poor woman could create something revolutionary. But I had something that money couldn't buy, a genuine passion for helping people feel good about themselves. It was during this journey that I met Ricardo, my late husband. He was an accountant and offered to organize the finances of my small company, which at the time was called Pure Nature. Ricardo didn't just organize my numbers, he fell in love with my vision. We married 2 years later, in a simple ceremony, at the church in the neighborhood where I grew up, with my mother Rose as my matron of honor. The following years were of exponential growth. Ricardo took care of the administrative side, while I dedicated myself to product development and direct customer service. Marina and Edward were born, and our company expanded beyond my most ambitious dreams. But financial success never changed our fundamental values. We continued to live simply, investing almost everything back into the business and in discreet social actions. Marina grew up seeing me visit underprivileged communities, where I taught women to produce natural soaps as a source of extra income. Edward accompanied me to public schools, where we funded libraries and science labs. For them, philanthropy wasn't extraordinary, it was simply part of who we were as a family. But things started to change when Marina married Alvaro. I tried to like him, really. He was a lawyer, successful, elegant. Marina seemed happy, but from the beginning, I noticed something in his eyes that bothered me. A subtle greed, a constant calculation. He didn't see our family as people. He saw us as opportunities. The first tensions arose during family gatherings. Alvaro always had suggestions on how to optimize our company, how to maximize profits, how to expand more aggressively. His ideas weren't necessarily bad, but there was something about the way he presented them that made me uncomfortable. It was as if he were constantly assessing our assets, calculating his future share. Edward, on the other hand, followed a more independent path. He became an environmental lawyer, always supporting our social initiatives, but preferring to build his own career. He understood my vision, but he also worried about practical matters, the family's financial sustainability, the children's education, the safety of all of us. Ricardo passed away 5 years ago, a victim of cancer discovered too late. He spent his last months making me promise to continue our mission, to not let money become more important than the values we built together. Cecilia, he said in the last serious conversation we had, you have the power to change the world. Don't let anyone convince you that your responsibility is only to our family. Your responsibility is to all of humanity. These words haunted and inspired me during the following 5 years. I took complete control of the company, which had become an empire valued at hundreds of millions. But the richer I became, the emptier I felt. Family dinners became meetings where Alvaro subtly questioned my donations, where he planted doubts about the sustainability of our generosity. Cecilia, he'd say with that calculating smile, don't you think you should think more about the future of the grandchildren, about creating a college fund for them, about ensuring the family continues to prosper for generations? Marina usually remained silent during these conversations, clearly torn between loyalty to her husband and respect for the convictions I had instilled in her. Edward tried to mediate, suggesting compromises that could satisfy everyone, but I felt I was losing my own family to a mentality I despised. That's when I started visiting my mother Rose more frequently. At 92, she still lived in the same house where I was born, still cultivated her herbs, still prepared remedies for the neighbors. During our conversations in the jasmine-scented backyard, she helped me find clarity. My daughter, she said, one golden autumn afternoon, remember when you were little, and you shared your bread with the hungry boys in the street. You never questioned if they deserved it, or if it was sustainable. You just saw need, and responded with love. What changed? Nothing had changed, I realized. I was still the same person. I had simply allowed outside voices to question my essence. It was at that moment that I decided to create the Abundant Life Fund. I spent months planning, consulting lawyers specializing in philanthropy, studying similar cases around the world. The project was ambitious: scholarships for research on rare diseases, support homes for orphans, a free cultural center in my hometown, $200 million that would transform thousands of lives. I knew there would be resistance, especially from Alvaro, but I didn't imagine the cruelty of those words, "You'll die rich and hated." They echoed in my mind for days after that afternoon on the terrace. Was he right? Was it possible that my family saw me only as a source of money? The answer came in the following weeks, when Alvaro began his campaign to discredit me. He spoke to the grandchildren in private, planting doubts about my sanity. He publicly questioned my business decisions. He even went so far as to consult other lawyers about the possibility of contesting my will. Marina was visibly torn. One night, she came to visit me alone. She found me in the office, organizing papers related to the Abundant Life Fund. "Mom," she said, sitting in the armchair opposite my desk, "I support your decision. I always have, but I'm worried about the consequences for our family. Alvaro is different, more aggressive. He's talking about lawsuits, about questioning your mental capacity. I don't know what to do anymore." I looked at my eldest daughter, this strong woman who had become an executive of an international NGO, who dedicated her life to social causes, and I saw in her the same passion for justice that had always motivated me. But I also saw fear. Fear of conflict, fear of family division, fear that our family would fall apart. "Marina," I said, holding her hands, "sometimes doing what's right means accepting that not everyone will understand or support our decision. I can't live in fear of the judgment of others, especially when I know I have the power to save lives." Edward, in turn, adopted a more pragmatic position. He suggested that I consider a middle ground, perhaps donating 70% of the fortune and keeping 30% for the family. It was a sensible proposal, but one that didn't answer the call I felt in my heart. Tensions reached a peak when Alvaro finally put his threats into action. He found a legal loophole. A rival company questioned the validity of my will, alleging undue influence from third parties on my decisions. It was an absurd accusation, but one that required a legal response. It was during the preparations for the lawsuit that I suffered a heart attack. I was at home, reviewing documents, when I felt a sharp pain in my chest. Marina found me unconscious on the office floor. The doctor said it was the accumulated stress of the past months. During the 3 days I spent in the hospital, I had time to reflect on everything that had happened. The visits alternated. Marina and Edward worried, the grandchildren confused, Alvaro conspicuously absent. But it was my mother Rosa's visit that changed everything. She arrived leaning on her cane, carrying a small pot of basil. "I brought this for you," she said, placing the plant on the bedside table. "Remember what I taught you about basil?" I smiled, remembering childhood lessons, that it purifies the environment and wards off negative energies. "Exactly. But do you know what the secret of basil is? It only flourishes when it's pruned. The more you cut it, the stronger it becomes." I understood the metaphor. I was being pruned, tested, challenged, and this would make me stronger. It was there, in that hospital room smelling of disinfectant and basil, that I decided to write personal letters to each member of the family. Not farewell letters, but real letters. I wanted everyone to know who I really was, why I had made that decision, and what I hoped they would understand about our family. The letter to Marina detailed the silent sacrifices I made so she could attend the best university, the late nights working to fund her social projects, and the pride I felt watching her champion important causes. For Edward, I wrote about his integrity, how much I admired his independence and his dedication to the environment. I recounted the times, as a child, he accompanied me to underprivileged communities, and always asked if he could donate his toys to children who had nothing. To my grandchildren, John and Lucy, I wrote about dreams and possibilities, about how they could use their education and opportunities to make a difference in the world. But the hardest letter was the one I wrote to Alvaro. In it, I revealed something I had never told anyone years ago. When he was just starting his career as a lawyer, his firm went through a severe financial crisis. His father, who worked there, was about to be laid off. That's when I made an anonymous donation that saved the company from bankruptcy. Alvaro never knew, but it was my money that secured his father's job, and indirectly, his financial stability during his first years of marriage to Marina. In the letter, I explained my motivation. "I did this not because you or your family owed me anything, but because I believe everyone deserves opportunities. Now I'm asking you to understand that my decision about the Abundant Life Fund stems from the same place, the belief that I can use my resources to create opportunities for thousands of people who, like your family, deserve a chance." When I was discharged from the hospital, I delivered the letters personally. Each person's reaction was different, but Alvaro's was the most impactful. He read the letter silently, in my office, while I watched his expression change. I saw surprise, embarrassment, and finally, something that seemed like understanding. "I didn't know," he said, his voice much softer than I was used to hearing. "I never imagined that." "You weren't supposed to know," I replied. "I didn't do it expecting gratitude or recognition. I did it because it was the right thing to do." He was silent for a long time, rereading parts of the letter. When he finally looked up, I saw something different in his eyes. The calculating coldness had been replaced by something more human. If you've been following stories like this about family transformation and conflict resolution, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories that show how love and persistence can change even the hardest hearts. The trial took place 3 weeks later. Marina and Edward had worked tirelessly, gathering testimonies from communities that would benefit from the Abundant Life Fund, documenting the social impact the project could have. The press had taken an interest in the cause, transforming it into a public movement supporting responsible philanthropy. I was prepared for any outcome. I knew I had made the right decision, regardless of what the courts decided. But I wasn't prepared for what happened that September morning. We were all in the courtroom, me, Marina, Edward, my lawyers, and the representatives of the rival company that had challenged my will. Alvaro was present, but had remained neutral throughout the process. Or so we thought. During the hearing, After my lawyers had presented all the arguments, after the testimonies from the benefiting communities had moved even the most austere judge, Alvaro stood up. "Your Honor," he said, his voice clear and firm, "I would like to give a statement." Silence filled the courtroom. Marina looked at me, confused. Edward frowned. I felt my heart quicken, bracing myself for the worst. But then Alvaro began to speak, and his words completely surprised me. For years I saw my mother-in-law, Cecilia Moreau, as a successful businesswoman. I respected her competence, admired her determination, but I confess I never truly understood her essence. Recently, I discovered that 5 years ago, when my family was facing financial difficulties, she made an anonymous donation that saved the company where my father worked. She helped us without expecting recognition, simply because she believed that everyone deserves opportunities. He paused, and I could see tears in his eyes. Today I understand that contesting Cecilia's will wasn't defending my family, it was defending my own fear of insignificance without my in-laws' money. But I've learned that true significance doesn't come from what we inherit, but from what we build with our own hands, and what we leave for future generations. Therefore, I publicly declare my full support for the Abundant Life Fund, and apologize to my mother-in-law for not understanding before that her generosity is not a flaw, it's her greatest virtue. The silence that followed was different from that afternoon on the terrace. It wasn't a silence of shock or discomfort, but of deep emotion. I saw Marina cry. I saw Edward smile with pride. I saw the judge himself discreetly wipe his eyes. The verdict was unanimous. My will was fully approved. The Abundant Life Fund was officially approved. But what moved me most wasn't the legal victory. It was seeing Alvaro approach me after the hearing, his hands trembling slightly. "Cecilia," he said, his voice choked with emotion, "I hope one day you can forgive me, and I hope you'll let me help with the Abundant Life Fund. I want my children to see what kind of man I can be when I follow your example, not when I fight against it." In that moment, embracing my son-in-law in the courthouse hallway, I understood that I had gained much more than a legal battle. I had recovered my family, not through concessions or compromises, but by staying true to my values until others chose to join me. 6 months later, we inaugurated the first Abundant Life Fund Center in my hometown. My mother, Rose, at 93, was the guest of honor. Marina coordinated the educational programs. Edward handled the legal and environmental aspects, and Alvaro, wearing a volunteer vest, distributed educational materials to the community children. John and Lucy, my grandchildren, had become junior ambassadors for the project, creating social media campaigns to raise awareness among other young people about social responsibility. Seeing their radiant faces as they helped other children made me realize that I had managed to leave the most important legacy of all, a new generation that understood that privilege comes with responsibility. Today, 2 years after that afternoon on the terrace, when I think of Alvaro's cruel words, "You'll die rich and hated," I smile. He was right about one thing: I will die rich. Rich in love, rich in purpose, rich in the certainty that my life made a difference. As for dying hated, well, I receive letters daily from people whose lives have been transformed by the Abundant Life Fund. Children who found hope in the support houses, researchers who received scholarships to study rare diseases, entire families who discovered opportunities at the cultural center. Hate me? I don't think so. What I see in people's eyes when I meet them is gratitude, respect, and something even more precious, inspiration for them to also make a difference with their own resources, however small. Alvaro has become one of the most dedicated volunteers at the Abundant Life Fund, not because he feels obligated, but because he discovered that helping others gives him a sense of purpose that money never could. Marina is planning to expand the project to other countries. Edward created a specific branch for environmental issues. My grandchildren proudly talk about the grandma who changed the world. And me, I wake up every day knowing that I chose to live according to my values, even when it meant facing resistance from people I loved. I learned that sometimes, to keep a family united, we need to be willing to risk losing it temporarily. I learned that true wealth isn't in what we accumulate, but in what we choose to leave behind. And I learned that true love sometimes requires the courage to disappoint people in the present, so that we can inspire them in the future. My story isn't over yet. I have plans to expand the Abundant Life Fund, to create new projects, to continue transforming lives.
But even when my time here is up, I know that the legacy will continue, not only through financial resources, but through the values I managed to transmit to my family and to everyone who has been touched by our mission. In the end, it doesn't matter if you're born rich or poor, if you inherit millions or build your fortune from scratch. What matters is what you choose to do with what you have. And I chose to transform privilege into purpose, wealth into responsibility, individual success into collective impact. This is my story, this is my choice, and this is my legacy. Proof that when we act driven by genuine love for our fellow human beings, we don't die rich and hated. We live forever in the hearts of all those we help to have a better life.